Sodor was facing a crisis. COVID-19 had arrived. COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, is a respiratory disease that at the present time doesn't have a cure. As a result, many of the townspeople are quarantined at home, and many businesses have closed. Sir Topham Hatt knew his railway had to adapt. The lack of revenue meant that all his resources would have to be used as economically as possible. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds wearing a face mask. "Due to the current circumstances," he announced, "I could only allow the smaller engines to go out. This is due to a shortage of staff and resources during these times." The engines were very disappointed by this news, but they understood why this was happening. With the big engines out of action, Sir Topham Hatt arranged for the smaller engines to run the main line. Edward, Thomas, Duck, and Ryan were in charge of the passenger trains. Percy, Toby, Oliver, Bill, and Ben had to run the branch lines. The twins were disappointed that their break band special had been cancelled, but both were pleased to be running Edward's branch line. To help keep spirits up, Sir Topham Hatt had brought Stepney from the Bluebell Railway to help with the odd jobs. Engines were excited to see their friend again. Due to the railway's new limitations, Donald had to work without his twin. He and Arthur were tasked with running goods trains together. Since the quarry over at Thomas's branch line was closed, Mavis was called to help Markland with the shunting at Knapford. Salty was even allowed to deliver a few trains from the docks to Knapford. He was grateful for Rosie's help. Engines had to remember to keep trains small. Only 2 coaches were needed per train, and there were no more than 6 trucks on goods trains, excluding brake vans. At the end of the day, engines and every piece of rolling stock that worked needed a good scrubbing and wash to avoid any contamination. The fact that only the smaller engines needed cleaning made the job easier. "It took forever to get the bigger engines clean," one said. "Agreed," said another. "It's a shame the railway can't afford the extra help to keep them running." The little engines were thankful to be out and about, but all the same they felt rushed off their wheels. That night in the sheds, Gordon, James, and Henry were sulking. "It's disgraceful," grunted Gordon. "It's disgusting," agreed James. "It's despicable," added Henry. "Disrespectful is more like it," finished Richard. "I miss being able to pull trains just as much as the rest of you, but we must remember, by staying in the shed, we're doing our part for the railway." Gordon, James, and Henry couldn't agree more, but all 4 still felt sad. They had no idea when they would be allowed to work again. One evening, as Percy was waiting for his mail vans to be loaded, the church bell rang, and clapping and cheering could be heard from a distance. Percy was confused. "What are they cheering for?" he asked. His driver explained. "The townspeople are cheering for the essential workers. When the clock strikes 7, people come out and cheer for the heroes who soldier through the pandemic, like doctors, nurses, firefighters, and even railway workers. It's a way of showing their appreciation." "Are they cheering for engines too?" Percy asked. "Of course," replied the driver. "It's a shame the bigger engines are missing out." Later, when Percy finished his mail run, he puffed into Tidmouth for a wash. As he did, he could hear his friends moping in the sheds. "Ironic," sighed a sad Gordon, "that the big important engines like us have nothing to do when the railway needs us the most." "I agree, Gordon, but you have to admit the little engines have done a great job on their own," observed James. "I'm glad the people of Sodor are showing their gratitude for the railway." Percy, being a kind-hearted engine, felt sorry for the bigger engines. He wanted his friends to feel appreciated too. At first, the railway found the new schedule easy to manage, but as the weeks went by, problems arose. Certain goods were in high demand, and the train started to get longer. As a result, the engines had to work extra hard. Goods became very heavy, more BR Mark coaches had been acquired, they were easier to keep clean and maintain, and coal and petroleum were running low. As a result, the engines had to double, triple, and even quadruple head the heavier trains. To counter the fuel shortage, a few of the steamies tried to burn wood as an alternative, but this turned out to be a bad idea. Aye, this is dreadful! What's the matter, Donald? Being a wood-burning engine is great! That's right! No, it feels wrong! Why don't a lot of you respect social distance guidelines and stay an island apart from Sodor? I thought it was 6 feet apart. It's an island apart! Now get going! Good grief! Exclaimed Arthur. I'm exhausted. I feel like my safety valve could burst any moment. I've never been this tired, panted Duck. And I feel like I'm using more coal and water than the railway can spare. Aye, agreed a tired Donald. If only the bigger engines could help us. Everyone agreed. They all thought something must be done, but none knew what. All but one engine. Stepney had an idea. The next morning, the express was back in service. Edward and Thomas had to double-head the train with Ryan as a banker. It was a difficult journey indeed. Meanwhile, at Knapford, Stepney had disappeared, which left Percy to manage the passenger trains on his own. He was just crossing over the point when suddenly the strain was too much. Oh, botheration! Groaned Percy. Now what? Mavis was called to help Percy, but she couldn't shunt the little green engine in his train to the station on her own. But there was worse to come. The signalman had just given the express clearance to pass through. Percy's coaches were in the way, and Mavis was still struggling to move. Get out! Get out! Called the signalman. The express will be coming through any minute! Clear the area now! Mavis's engine roared to life. But it wasn't enough. Stop! Stop! Screeched Edward. Thomas and Ryan applied their brakes. But it was no good. Edward crashed into the rear end of Percy's train, causing him to derail. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Edward's front was completely mangled. Oh my! Gasped Ryan. Are you alright, Edward? I am, Ryan, replied Edward wearily, but I don't think the express is going anywhere anytime soon. Percy looked pained. I'm so sorry, Edward. I burst my safety valve. My train was too much for me to handle alone. It wasn't your fault, Percy, sympathized Edward. You did the best you could. Oh dear, sighed Thomas. Little engines can do big things, but this is all too much. That evening, the Fat Controller spoke to all the engines. This just won't do, he sighed. I've pushed you all too hard, and the unusual pressure has been wearing you all out. He paused impressively. I think it's for the best that I close the railway for the time being, unless, of course, anyone has a brilliant idea. I do, sir, called a voice. another engine puffed into the yards with an astounding assortment of coal trucks and oil tankers and a coach with workmen aboard. The engines were amazed. "What's all this?" asked a puzzled Arthur. Stepney explained. "I know the railway was in trouble, and it gave me an idea. The Bluebell Railway has coal, oil, and workers to spare. I went back there today and asked my friend Ted and my manager to help, and they agreed. I believe that with the Bluebell Railway support, the engines of Sodor should have all the coal and oil they need, and every engine, big or small, can take turns doing the work." The Fat Controller smiled. "What a clever engine you are, Stepney! Well done!" He turned to the other engines. "It seems I won't have to close the railway after all." The next day, half the bigger engines were ready to get back to work. Thanks to Stepney and the Bluebell Railway, the railway was getting back on track. "It's lovely to be in steam again," Gordon said grandly. Everyone was grateful for Stepney and the Bluebell Railway support. Soon, all of the Fat Controller's engines were back to being really useful engines again, despite the crisis. One evening, as all the engines were settling in, they could hear the clock tower bell ringing, followed by cheering, applauses, and unusual sounds like car horns and metal bangs. All the engines looked at each other. They all knew what that meant. It was the 7 p.m. thank you cheers. The townspeople cheered to recognize all the individuals who worked through the pandemic. Then Percy started to whistle. "Give it up for us Sodor engines! We're heroes too!" That was enough to convince the other engines to join the chorus of cheers and whistles as well. Because Sodor engines always do their best, no matter what.